let's get started. As I said, I'm just so great. My name's Lisa Merrill. I am grateful to Art.com for inviting John and I to create a class called Photography at Home, and I'm thrilled to have you all with us. As I said, I encourage you to watch the first 3 Art.com classes in the new Art.com studio. They're great. One photographer, Ursula, who deeply inspired me, and 2 awesome painters. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that this is a very scary and challenging time for all of us. Routines are turned upside down. I know many of you may have lost income and jobs or loved ones. I want to give a shout out to my cousins in New York and Atlanta who lost their mom to COVID-19, my Aunt Carol. And I just encourage you all to do whatever self-care is important to you. For me, and I'm sure for many of you, it's art and creativity. And that's why I'm really glad you joined me today. And I will be sharing tips to help you use whatever camera you own in your home while sheltering in place safely to create images that bring you joy and potentially others as well. So before I start the class, which will have over 100 images in it, I just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a professional travel photographer who works in partnership with my husband, John. We create images for tourism and outdoor adventure clients around the world, and our work is licensed for use in travel, websites, magazines, and books. Even after 25 years, it is still a thrill to see our photos in print. And one recently is in this book, which I just loved, Where the Crawdads Sing. And that's a photo I created, and I love the book. So we're also thrilled to have our work on Art.com. You can see in that URL, you can enjoy a lot of these images. I'm going to share the backstory. You can look at them later and purchase them for your walls if you like. I got into photography when I was about 8 years old with a pocket Instamatic camera, and then a friend, Nancy Vogel, if you're watching, got me into darkroom photography in college, which was just amazing. After I graduated and came to Seattle, John and I continued doing black and white darkroom photography at a local community college. And while we had different day jobs, we started taking workshops. And some of the amazing photographers who have had such an influence on our lives and our photography are Art Wolf, Brian Peterson, Bobby Lane, and Carl Grobel. And I have a list of those photographers and more for you at the end of this class, which you can write and get. But we're always learning, and photography remains incredibly exciting even after moving from film to digital as we've progressed. But we're always learning, and now we're paying it forward. And it's quite a joy to share our passion and our expertise with others in all different forms. We do workshops and tours. We're doing a lot of online teaching these days. And I love helping others nurture their creativity. And I hope this next 45 minutes is a joy for you and inspires you to get out with your cameras and photograph at home. Over the years, our photography has evolved. Started out doing a lot of nature photography and outdoor recreation photography with our skis and our bikes, our rafting and canoeing. And then as we traveled more and more, we found a love for travel photography, which encompasses so much, from cityscapes to culture to food, architecture, festivals. And you're going to see a fair amount of travel photos today, but in each tip that we share, we're going to show photos we created at home. So this is a new workshop that John and I created for Art.com, and it'll include quite a variety of images. My ongoing journey as an artist, I'm always learning, always thinking, how can I create new photos that are powerful, that tell my story for myself, my family, our clients. I like to say when I'm out with my camera, life is a visual scavenger hunt. It's interesting, fascinating. Art.com asked me to share what inspires me, which is a great question. And I would say beauty in all forms, the way light can transform an ordinary moment, an object, a person, and the ability for a photo and a group of photos to freeze time and preserve them. Those are some of the things that really gets me excited. And as you'll see, we'll share some of the tips of how you can take your photography to the next level. Even before the pandemic, John and I always say the best travel photography begins at home. So now that we're physically isolated We all have an opportunity to dive in and build skills and create our own visual stories at home. Whether you're alone, with a pet, of things in your house, or if you're sharing with housemates and family members, now's the time to use your cameras and take your photography to the next level. So I'm going to share some tips and ideas to help you create portraits, people at work and play, pets, your living space, food photography, and more. This class is for all photographers of any level with any camera. So send questions anytime. We're going to have about 30 minutes of a slideshow, as I like to say, and then 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. As I started to say before, travel photography is our focus, and that's pretty broad. It includes nature, cityscape, street photography, portraits, food, movement, sports. But for today's class, we're going to leave out majestic landscapes and street photography, which we love, and really show tips of the type of photos you can take at home, in your driveway, and in your neighborhood. So with that, let's get started and show some images. I am going to do that right now. Hold on, and we're going to start by first acknowledging my partner, John, who is here behind the scenes, is my partner, my soulmate. We've met in 1990, and 1990, and started Merrill Images in 96. So it's been about 25 years, two amazing kids along the way, and he's created a lot of the images you're going to see now. I want to thank him for everything, as well as our kids and our friends who allowed us to use your images. So let's start out. Photography is a lot about seeing. So I start with this image of one-eyed Buddha from Ladakh in India, where we hope to lead a photo tour in 2021. Because for me, it encompasses the whole focus on seeing and seeing deeply. We talk a lot about mindful photography, intentional photography. That matters much more even than technique. How you think about the world you're looking at, and you making choices with every click of a shutter. And that's what we're going to get into today. Choices about light, about composition. One of the masters of photography, Elliot Erwitt, said, photography has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way you see them. So here's where John, way back when in film days, took the one eye and created it from this with a long lens and an interesting perspective. It hangs in our hallway entry and continually reminds me to look at the world deeply and in different ways. So we're going to start with people at work and play. Because I'm assuming we all have different reasons to using our cameras, but I'm going to assume that you're watching this because at some point you like to take photos of people. And we're going to start with some travel photography and share a few trips, and they're all applicable to at home. So here in this photo from Myanmar, you can see a long diagonal, and lines are a really powerful tool in photography to lead your viewer's eye through the frame. You start with the boy on the horse and you just follow it through the temple. So lots and lots of our photos have lines, and especially diagonals. It's just one tool to help you. And also, you notice how he's at the side, not bullseyed. That asymmetry is a choice you can make. So we're going to look at a few examples. Here's another one. You see how the line leads you right to the weaver's hands here? And so that's a great thing to use in verticals and in horizontals. All of these compositional things are tools. They're not rules. They're just ways you can choose to create images. So I encourage you to look for lines, and you're going to see them in the images I show today and hopefully in your own. And a shout out to Daryl Goulet, another amazing photographer who's watching, who's influenced John and I so much. And then I'm going to talk a lot today about backgrounds. You have a choice of your background, i.e. in where you stand or where you kneel. And they can really add context, especially with travel photography, and also simplify or distract from your photo. So in this case, it's a fuzzed out background. We're going to talk about that later, how to do that. But I just want you to look at a few images and see how important backgrounds are. They can add to the story, In this case, an image from Ecuador John created where the woman just appears to be stepping right out from the mural behind her. So in this case, we might find a background and wait. In this case, she was selling her produce there, so it's a great shot that John created a while ago. Sometimes simple backgrounds, like this blue wall in Cuba, a place we love to photograph, can help your subject pop. And you're going to see a lot of images in this workshop of daylight and bright light, but I encourage you to keep your camera out in dusk. Here he's lit by a street light, which made that nice shadow behind the guitar player. And light is what I really I'm going to talk about next. We're going to really condense a few hours of our photo class into this, so we're going to quickly move along. But light is everything, how it hits your subject. And window light is one of our favorite types of light, or as Bobby Lane talks, porch light, because you get beautiful light here on this woman's face in Angkor Wat without harsh shadows because she has something over her head. So if you're out photographing your kids or your family, try moving them onto a porch or even in your garage with daylight coming in but something over. And I think you'll find that can be really interesting. And flash you can use as well, subtly, which we do sometime as well. The overcast days are one of our favorite times to shoot. So here we are in a courtyard in Peru, and this brings me to emotion. You can have all of the technique right, but if your photo doesn't have any emotion of a portrait, it can kind of fall flat. So we're always looking for emotion, action. We'll talk about movement and interaction if it's a group of people. So here, the moment she pulled the yarn out of the dye, I was ready, and I probably shot quite a few frames and then afterward chose which one for gesture. But I encourage you, photography is a lot about moment and having fast reflexes, knowing your camera, and often shooting more than one, which we can do in this world of digital photography. And with people often ask, well, how do you handle photographing strangers? And that's a very personal technique and process, but building a rapport will help you tremendously with your photography. Asking permission, whether it's someone you meet while traveling or your loved ones in your family, getting that permission and being sensitive to what's going on. We often show postcards and tell a little bit about ourselves. Oh, John's telling me, Sandy Carter, hi, and Danita, so great to see you both. But I want to, also encourage you to take a few photos of someone. We met this woman recently in Panama, Yoli, living in a thatched hut in the San Blas Islands, and created a story about her, coming out of her door, sharing some of the beautiful mola she created, and one of us photographs at a time. And then this one I love that John took of her hands just on the beautiful embroidery. So, sometimes you might have different themes. One of ours is hands. We do a lot with crafts people and artists, which you'll see later. Some people do doorways, laundry, sports, but encourage you to find some themes you love and take them over and over. So here's a few more hands right here. If many of you, I assume, are artists or who have artist friends, since you're in tune with Art.com, I love to watch painters. I don't paint at all, and photograph them if they allow that. And I always make sure the brush is visible and in focus. And every time we travel or in Seattle at the local craftspeople, we love to photograph hands. This is lacquerware in Vietnam, actually Myanmar. Or in this case, a potter in Mexico, in Baja, loves to get the light coming in from the window and watching and photographing as he's turning his pottery and making this beautiful, beautiful bowl. But I also step back and show a craftsperson at work, which is hard sometimes because crafts workshops are often chaotic. So it's very carefully I'm choosing where to stand. I'm getting low here so his work can be in front of him. And of course, asking permission. Here's a messy crafts workshop in Cuba. You notice the rack coming out of his head? John and I call that a merger, and we don't usually love them. I could have tried to fuzz it out, but he's right next to it. So this would not be a photo I would keep, but I did for a lessons example. But watch what I did in a moment. I decided I loved the light on him, but I got lower and moved myself so that rack wasn't visible. And then I could create a shot like this, which is still a favorite. And I used to always show the full head of a person, but in this was a really profound kind of aha moment for me when I realized you don't have to. I can put his head in the corner and get a really nice composition that I like a lot, really accentuating his hands, working at the wheel and the plates that he created. And position matters a lot. John is always one to climb up high on stairs and shoot down at things, get on chairs. And this is a photo I love from Ladakh where he was on a balcony photographing down with a pretty tight lens of a llama with the ceremonial horns. These days, if you have a camera, well, your phone can do it, but if you have a camera with live view and a screen that tilts, I love that for getting up high at a festival where I can hold my camera 9 feet high, see what I'm shooting, and click the frame. So, and here, now I've shown you a bunch of travel photos. I'm going to take those same tips and show you how they might work at home. So, getting up high, there's an old favorite of our daughter and our dog Bo that I still love so much. But John created it by looking down at them, and on a clean carpet, you see, a girl and her dog. With people photography, whether you're traveling or at home, emotions, interaction are everything. They don't have to be looking at the camera. In fact, I like it better when they're not looking at the camera. So here's one that brings me a lot of joy of a camping trip with our daughter. She's on the stage here a lot, but get it if you have kids at home or if you can photograph your neighbor's kids safely these days. They are great subjects, doing things like a pie eating contest on the 4th of July or blowing on a dandelion. Again, here's an example of a cropped face and a simple, uncluttered background. We're going to get into movement photography and, doing kids and people in action. But it takes fast reflexes and a fast shutter speed, which we'll talk about to get these drops of water in the air. But while you're sheltering at home with anyone, if you have someone who plays a musical instrument, whether it be a toy accordion, a piano, or a guitar, see if you can create photos of musicians at work. And I want to thank Talia for letting me show these images. Kids in their rooms, they'll remember that and love these photos later. I love seeing photos of me in my room that my dad created so long ago. Perhaps you have some craftsters in your house, artists, young artists, old. Have people with, in this case, playing peekaboo with a paper crown. Probably a lot of you are readers or have readers. This is an example of window light and a little bit and reflecting off the page for a dramatic shot of a girl reading a book. Again, where I stood mattered a lot. It's springtime now, and I know with the food issues we're having, more and more people are planting gardens. I absolutely love my tower garden, and thanks Sue for that. And here's a photo John created. I always say he created. You make photos, not take photos. So he made this photo with a lot of choices last year at my harvest as I'm chopping down some chard. And games. Our family absolutely loves playing games, and so this is an old favorite, getting down low, of our son and his uncle at playing a game in the winter. I bet some of you play Jenga. It's always fun to try to get the tower as it crashes, which I have, but not here today. But it's a lot of fun because people are intent. And you can do things even, this is called a lens baby. I use this to fuzz out a lot of my mom playing Scrabble. I miss her so much, and this is one of my all-time favorite photos of her. Kids holding things up. I was a photographer for many years at an amazing local children's museum, and that helped me practice and hone my skills on a daily or weekly basis, which is just a great thing rather than waiting until traveling or special family milestones. And props, you see a lot of our photos have people with things. If someone's holding something, they often relax, whether it be a hula hoop in the backyard, or in this case, harvest. harvesting vegetables. This is a photo of my friend, and I didn't know when I created it that she would pass away really early from brain cancer. But can I say how happy I am that this photo is on a cookbook we created with all of her recipes? So I'm giving a shout out to Marianne and anyone else who loved her as I show you that photo. Teenagers, they can be challenging to photograph. So if you've got someone in your life you want to photograph, perhaps with their favorite sporting equipment, again, to show action. You've seen a lot of photos of single people, but you may want to create group photos. And I always encourage people, don't have everyone just stand in a line. If you can get some people on a bench or a ladder holding something, like in this case, tools for the clubhouse that was being built, it can add interest and variety to everyone just kind of standing there staring at your camera. Or perhaps they do a human pyramid in your living room. Got to have fast reflexes for that one. John and I do a lot of portraits of families for hire. This one is one of my favorites, of a mom and her young son with a soft light and the tree in the background. But how people casually embrace each other can be really add a lot to your photos to emphasize the connection, the physical emphasizing the emotional connections. And if they're small and light enough to flip over the head, go for it. And focusing on the eye is important. If you have a camera that does continuous autofocus, that'll keep changing the focus as movement happens. We're not going to get too technical today, but I'll throw out some terms that you can hopefully look up if that's of interest. And this is a time of some intergenerational living. I know many examples of that. If that's the case for you, capture those grandparents with kids. And if you're not able to see parents and elderly relatives, well, then the power of photos to share what you're living through is even more important for those who are alone or isolating for safety. And I'll end this section on people photos with silhouettes. You don't always have to have the faces visible. Silhouettes are fun. They're all about shapes. Practice as the sun goes down. I'll also show some silhouettes with shadows in your house at daylight. But some of our tips for silhouettes are to get low, so the shapes are high in the frame. And, look for the gestures, the profiles, or in this case, the movement of a group jumping rope. And the last thing to look out for with people photography are reflections. It's a gift. I often, if our cat is at the window, I grab a camera because I'm excited to try that. In this case, a young boy at a window can add a really interesting bit to your photography. Or of your house itself, reflection in a window can be interesting, or even a car hood in the driveway. So that's our tips for photos of portraits. We're going to get to movement in a bit, but I just want to switch now to animals. If any of you love photographing animals, like John and I'm going to show you a few of the wildlife photos we created on our travels. And it's a lot of the same tips I just talked about. Where you take a photo from is huge. In this case, John was low enough to photograph what we call a lizard with attitude on a rock. So you could actually see his little feet up against the hot rock, and a beautiful background behind him of the blurred out red rocks in Australia. Recently, I was in Panama, and we watched these little hermit crabs all over on the beach, and I found them really hard to photograph. Later in the forest, we saw them on a tree, and that was my chance to be able to show this hermit crab up close. He looks a little bit like E.T. or Wally, we said, Wally, with the green background. And it's challenging because he's moving, but it's fun. Or just recently we had the distinct pleasure of photographing in Yellowstone, and the buff bison were often just sitting there eating and not being that interesting. And at one point we saw or heard of them rush down a hillside. And while I was in the car using my Olympus camera, which has amazing stabilization and a long lens and fast autofocus, I got this photo focused on the eye of the bison, one of my favorites from that trip. And we also were lucky to see a fox come at us. So here, background, light, focusing on the eye. All the things I talked about for people apply for animal photography. Now, if you're home, you're not seeing bison or fox, but you might have the opportunity, hopefully, if things start opening up, to go to a local zoo. I'm a big supporter of zoos, especially like Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle, which does so much for research and conservation. It's a great way to hone your skills before going on any wildlife trips, or to hone your skills for your pet photography. Perhaps you have squirrels in your backyard, or some rabbits. Birds. I know Steve Ball, who's watching, just delights me every day with his bird photography from his backyard. Here's a little squirrel with attitude. If you're lucky enough to have pets in your house or friends with pets, great opportunities. This dog is now 7 years old, but I was grateful for a puppy photo shoot of Arrow. And in this case, we had him on the dock, we had him in the grass, but then my friend had a red pillow, and that was fun. My family and I foster dogs and cats for the Seattle Humane, and each one has had a big impact on my life. So here's Luna having a moment on a chair. And I'll forever be grateful to Bo, who we had 13 amazing years with, and here he is in a field of flowers. These days, I'm lucky enough to have Calvin in my life, our renter's dog, and I'm going to show you 2 photos of Calvin. Here's one in our backyard, chewing on a log, and here's another. You see how the background got fuzzy? That's something that we use all the time with depth of field. How much of a shot is in focus? As photographers, we have a choice. We could have everything in focus, using a high f-stop or aperture, or a very shallow depth of field, which means your subject is in focus, but the background blurs, or sometimes the foreground blurs. I'm going to show you some more examples of that in a little bit with still lifes, but I want you to know whether you're shooting with a big camera, well, not so big, our new Olympuses we love, or a mobile phone. If you have a phone with 2 lenses, you can do this in portrait mode, or in a Samsung. It's called live focus, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but I want you to explore taking photos where everything's sharp or just the subject, because that'll really take your photos to another level. One of the many cats we fostered from birth, but cat toys are fun, and cats, if you're a cat lover like us, so much antics and fun to watch them play, and their cute little faces. Again, simple background, fuzzed out, good light on his little eyes. If you have someone who's with you, maybe they could dangle a ribbon. And in this case, you see how the line leads you right down to the cat playing and grabbing at it. Again, this is action shot, so I'm probably taking a few images at a fast shutter speed to get the frozen moment. Or boxes, cats crawling into boxes and baskets in nice light from the window. I shared this one on our Instagram account yesterday, Merrill Images, for those of you who don't yet follow us. But it's one of my favorite photos of our cat just walking across a shaft of light in our living room, and was able to get a silhouette indoors and a shadow. So it's kind of fun, all about shapes. More cats and shadows on a stairway with a beam of light shining down into the cat's eye. Just Roxy's looking up at us, so I could get that photo. Maybe you have a pet snake. Here's an example holding the reptile up of our son when he was young, and I have him out of focus a bit, but I focused on the snake. And if you have a pet in your life, sure, take your pet's photo, but don't forget to take people with pets. And the other tip I'll offer, which I didn't before, if it's a dog photo and you really want to do a lot with photography, take them for a walk first. Recently, I was photographing Calvin without having walked him first, and I regretted that. Needs to be a little bit tired and chill to get what you want to do. So I'm going to have a sip of water. Hope you're eating and drinking as you want during this broadcast, but now we'll get into movement. I talked about it a little bit before. If all of your photos are of people stock still, they'll might be great light, great emotion a bit, but I encourage you to try to get people, animals, vehicles, anything moving. It's kind of fun and challenging. This is street photography, a whole genre that we love. That's challenging as all. But I wanted to show you because there's a lot of movement. There's people looking at each other. It's one of my most favorite photos of Cuba. And when you're photographing people in movement, you have some choices. And what John and I do is put our cameras on shutter priority and choose a fast shutter speed and hold our shutter down in burst mode. We also often change the focus mode to keep focusing. That's a lot of techno speak. I urge you to just look it up online for your particular camera and practice. But if you choose to do this, here we have light coming in, a great diagonal line, but it's all about that gesture of the young monk in Myanmar flipping his robe. So that's the kind of thing that I think you might enjoy trying. And I'm going to show you a few photos of people in motion. I photographed this girl on the beach in Fiji looking at me, really cute and friendly. But my favorite photos are when she and her brother started moving on the rope swing. And in a situation like this, John and I would probably take different photos, some sharp, freezing the action, and others with a little creative blur. So here's creative blur, a chef making pasta. This is harder to do, and you'll have a lot you will delete, but it's a lot of fun. And in this case, we used a flash to have a slow shutter speed with a bit of flash to freeze them in motion. Sometimes we actually still use our tripod for a very slow shutter speed of something, in this case, letting the flags flutter. I was probably at a 1 second exposure. With our Olympus cameras these days, I don't even need a tripod for that, which is amazing because they have so much in-body stabilization. But here I'm waiting and taking a few to capture the flags in motion in Nepal. Or dancers with swirling skirts. This would be at least a second exposure. So I encourage you to try that. And then there's something called panning. If you haven't tried that, this is challenging, but a lot of fun. When John and I lead our Cuba photo workshops, we had everyone in our small group, 12 photographers, different experience levels, trying this out, and everyone was able to create photos of the classic cars in motion. And it's a technique where you use a slow shutter speed and follow along with the motion. It's possible to do it with the phone as well, and you can get an app called the Slow Shutter app to do a slow shutter speed. It really depends what shutter speed. It's up to what kind of lens you're using and how fast or slow things are going. If we're photographing a bicyclist in motion, like this example John created in Vietnam, he probably was using an 1/8 or a 1/10 of a shutter speed and very carefully moving with the subject, finding an interesting background, holding his finger down. We'll be leading a trip, if all goes well, the world goes back to being safe for travelers to Vietnam next April. We postponed the trip. We would have been there now. But I encourage you to try panning with kids on scooters, with bicyclists in your street from a safe distance. It's a lot of fun. So now let's look at some movement at home. Everything I talked about before, just want to re-emphasize some points. Fast action, like our nephew jumping into the lake. And by the way, happy birthday, Ben, if you're watching. This is Ben jumping in the lake. We probably needed 1/250th, a 500th of a shutter speed to capture him frozen. Or our neighbor, who's now a big strapping teenager, on his scooter down the street. Again, looking at the light, focusing continually, and letting our shutter go ch-ch-ch as he's coming towards us. It can be a lot of fun to capture people in the snow. We're now done with that where we live for a while, but here's our son getting ready to aim a snowball right at me. Favorite old shot, and I thank him for letting us use these photos today, but holding our shutter down and taking a few at the point of the snowball's release. For animals in motion, cats jumping, good light, fast shutter speed, take a few. Here's an example of Bo with his, favorite thing to do, chasing a ball. If you have a black lab or a black cat, here's an example where we do use flash, because otherwise it was hard to have any light in his eye. So as he's come, and it also helped freeze the action. But I often show in our workshops that photo and this one to show you what panning a dog might be like at really about probably 1/10 of a second or less, carrying his big log through the snow. Here's our Instagram post for today. Our daughter running in the yard a long time ago. Bubble time, so much fun for photography. And panning a bit, I'm pretty sure John made this photo a long time ago. One of our favorites. If and when you can go to the local beaches and able to have kids and others with water, that's a chance to really play with action photography. In this case, the kind of not frozen but not completely blurred. So we took a few. Our son probably was doing this for a while. Repeatable actions are great for photography. And here's that panning technique at our local park, holding our camera and following with the action. So that's a lot about movement. Hopefully we've talked, you're seeing a theme here because I'm repeating things a lot, but looking at light, paying attention to where you stand, looking for emotion, action, interaction, being playful, and being willing to explore and experiment with your photography, looking at your images after and trying to analyze what went well, what didn't went well. Maybe you have a photo friend or someone in your family who's into it. It's really helpful to share your work with others. In our resource list, we have a lot of online photo groups these days that are great for inspiration and learning, whether it's 52 frames or your camera manufacturer. Every day, John and I are learning from others in the Olympus community, and I encourage you to look at it, Get Olympus and Olympus at Home, because the techniques and tips are for users of all cameras. So now I'm going to leave people behind for a bit and talk about frames. This is something you can really, really look for in terms of things you see when you're on a ferry boat here in Seattle, once we can take ferries again. I'm always looking through the window at the car level before I go upstairs to see how Seattle looks as we leave the dock. In travel photography, we use frames a lot. Often at the introduction to our travel stories slideshow, I waited here in Vietnam after finding this beautiful doorway with the dark wood and the flags. And I knew, because it's a pretty busy street in Hanoi, that someone would go past pretty soon. So then I waited. Or in Venice, on one of the most exciting boat rides coming from the airport, we were treated to a lot of traffic and we used a bridge to frame the gondola. I often look for places to stay, Airbnb, hotels with different architectural views, and in this case, the arches in a great trip to Cartagena. I went back to this place because it was near our little apartment over and over to look at the view through the arches, which repeated. And frames can be windows and doorways and arches, but also you can use palm fronds. I was having coffee in Cartagena and saw this palm frond framing the cathedral. Or if you're in nature, in the beautiful park of Joshua Tree, one of our favorites at sunset, you can use one tree to frame another. And here again, silhouettes, all about shape and getting low enough so the black bottom isn't too heavy. If you have a place you're living or staying with a great view out the window, go for it. In this case, it was pretty special to be looking down on a rainbow from a cabin nearby at Crystal Mountain, or looking through a window with icicles coming down. So frames can invite you in, add context, a bit of mystery. It's a view into the world. And it's not just for nature or cityscapes, but for people. This is a fun silhouette John created a while ago of me in my hat that I wear a lot when we're out photographing, going down a stairway in a fort in Portugal. or frames for craftspeople. I was very, very careful here. Where do I stand so I can get this beautiful woman at the weaving loom in Myanmar with window light, working the white yarn being lit up, but she's carefully placed again in a corner, not right bullseye. And that's a lot of different decisions going through my head as I'm thinking about how to create a stronger photo. Frames in the snow, if you're lucky to live near snow and kids out playing and building snow forts. Or maybe July 4th, a frame that happens by a child just holding the flags near her face. If you still are lucky enough to have bedtime stories, and my heart goes out to all young parents with little kids 24/7, although I miss having our kids in our house. But this is one of my favorites from many years ago, of John's arm framing the kids and the light as he's reading them a story. Maybe you're a DIY sewer making masks or blankets. You can use the sewing machine, as John did, to frame me at work. Sometimes kids' toys, and with kids, as with pets, getting low, really low, like lying on the floor with your camera, will put the kid's face higher. For babies and kids, that's a really great thing to think about as you're deciding where should I stand or kneel or lie when taking a photo. And here we are with the frame of a teenager working in bike repair. One of the best things that John and I do with our photography is help nonprofits tell their story. We call it social impact photography. I encourage many of you, if you're at the point where you have the skills to help a nonprofit you care about tell their story, it's a very meaningful way to contribute and strengthen your own community. We do that at home here in Seattle and around the world. This is an organization we love called BikeWorks that encourages teens to develop bike repair skills for livelihood and interest, and also a bike culture in the community. So frames of a bike, back to kittens, frames of an animal and a cat toy. So now we're going to leave people behind and talk about still lifes. You know, a lot of what I did before talking about requires a lot of fast action. With still lifes, you can relax, take even more time. These Buddhas are not going anywhere. I ask permission at a market. Always love to photograph smoke, whether it's incense or candles or things, but I often will buy something to thank the vendor for allowing me to take a photo, or contribute a photograph through online email. But still lifes can be traveling. They're great to show the crafts and the context, the objects that are meaningful, as well as in your home, and they're not going anywhere. So you have time to ask yourself, how can I make this photo even stronger? With still lifes, the same tools of composition come into play. Diagonal lines to lead your viewer through the frame, in this case geraniums in a hallway, or architecture in Japan, and light and shadows. So now let's talk about depth of field again, and this is for you, Malia, and for anyone who's wondering, what does that mean, depth of field? How much of your frame is in focus? You have a choice. You can shoot everything sharp, that's high aperture, a high f-stop, same thing, and a high depth of field. And that's through the optics of how the camera works. So if you're using a DSLR or a mirrorless, you can put it on aperture priority, choose a high f-stop, and boom, have a lot in focus. Or you can fuzz out things with a low f-stop, and with your camera phones, you can put it on portrait mode. It's not just for people, as you saw with the dog before. Here's a bar scene. Everything sharp, high depth of field, fuzzed out the background. So have fun with that with still lifes. Still lifes can be funny, like your kids' slippers. Show what the things that are part of your life, or a Christmas ornament looking out a window with blue sky and snow. So I encourage you, when this class is over, go out in your home, find something to photograph. Maybe get on the floor and look up at wind chimes. Or if you're in an apartment building, look down at a stairway. But have fun with architecture, perhaps some close-ups. You can do that with macro lenses. We love our 60mm macro with Olympus. Or you might be able to use a moment lens, little tiny thing that attaches to lots of phones to help you do close-up photography. If you're lucky enough to have a weaver in your life, enjoy world of pattern photography. We often take a pattern shot, which means fill the frame with one thing, like this weaving, or beaded bracelets. So look around your house for patterns. John created this one of incense and used light and shadow in Vietnam, filling the frame. Or maybe it says you're waiting for a bartender to fill a whole group of daiquiris for your group in Cuba, as this one was. Food photography is a whole genre in itself, but it's a huge part of travel. And if you're cooking a lot these days, as most of us are, use your camera to photograph things you've created, maybe bread in a pattern, little pitas, or if you've got an amazing baker in your life, a fruit tart, getting low and side light shows texture. And don't forget to show the people cooking or serving. So here's an example of street food vendors in Myanmar. And then one of my favorites, again, they're looking at each other, of my mom and my son a long time ago making special cookies. You can use the steam of the pot for atmosphere and capture someone pouring the risotto into paella or serving soup. Using depth of field, again, to fuzz out the second bowl of soup. Maybe shoot from above. And here, textiles and plates can really add interest to your food photography. Getting different angles. I'm going to end up with nature. Nature is part of travel photography. John and I, wherever we travel, although we love vibrant cities, after a while we want to get a dose of nature. These days, it's really important for my own self-care. Look for light, in this case, early morning backlight on sunflowers near hot springs. If you see a rainbow, go for it. If you're using a lens that will accommodate it, any kind of a bigger camera than a phone, you can put a polarizer on to really accentuate colors as well as minimize reflections on the water. And if you're shooting in the forest and you want to do nature with dreamy waterfalls, sorry, my face is blocking that, but a slow shutter speed, either by putting it on a slow shutter speed on a camera like this or using that slow shutter app. So I walk around our neighborhood safely a lot with friends, and sometimes I see stuff like this, which just blows my mind, of the sun coming through the trees. We're lucky to live near a forest with trails that I can still walk in. So here the curve is leading us into the forest, or shooting up. So nature photography can be challenging, especially with bright lights. So lucky enough for us in the Northwest, we have a lot of overcast days, which makes everything easier. Not those dappled bright spots, but overcast. And I remember just losing myself in the palm fronds here, and having fun letting the foreground go out of focus. My little seedlings, before I planted them in that tower garden you saw, fun bit of nature photography. Or if you love succulents, have fun shooting the texture and the colors, or skunk cabbage. So nature photography, hopefully you have bits of nature near you, whether it's a house plant or a geranium. A lot of the same things come into play, shadows and light. So see how this was taken of dark and light at a plant? But the other day, I made a photo on my stairway of dramatic shadows. And that's the kind of thing I hope you'll go out and do. I know we went a little bit long today, but I'm glad so many of you are still watching. I encourage you to dive into your photography with this time. Send us any questions. You can look, as I said, at Art.com Merrill Images to see our photos. Email us at our website, there's a form, or Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be happy to send you a resource list I created just for this class with a lot of photography at home, challenges, and good information as well. John and I love doing Zoom photo coaching sessions with people and looking at images together and offering tips. If that's of interest, get in touch. If you feel like traveling in the future with us, get on our mailing list and we'll notify you about our photo workshops in the Northwest in 2021, hopefully in Vietnam, India, and Cuba. Join a virtual photo group or a photo club. And I just want to end, if we have time, we'll be taking some questions. But I want to thank our agent, Danita Delamont. Her website's there with amazing photography of nature and travel. Thank her for 25 years of being the best friend, neighbor, and agent we could hope for, and for facilitating this class. I want to thank the entire crew at Art.com, Michelle, Danielle, Malia, Cassie, for all of your support. And most of all, I want to thank you for joining us.